It is in this capacity that I have the great pleasure to welcome you to this important discussion with our panelists, MK Michal Kotler-Wunsch, MEP Nicholas Herbst, and Impact SE CEO Marco Scheff. I'm really thrilled that so many of you have joined us today. First, though, a quick administrative announcement. We would really appreciate if possibly you could all turn on your video, but for sure, write your name so that we can make sure that only registered guests are in the room. We have founded the Transatlantic Friends of Israel as a cross-party interparliamentary group dedicated to the alliance between Europe, the United States, Canada, and Israel. And to those of our parliamentary guests who may not yet officially be part of this growing network of over 90 lawmakers so far, I extend a very warm invitation. Membership really doesn't come with any obligations, but simply connects like-minded parliamentarians on both sides of the Atlantic. As this is a TFI event, we have invited primarily lawmakers to this meeting, but given the importance of the topic, we have also reached out to relevant officials, and we had a number of registrations. I'm not now sure whether they are indeed already in the room, but we have also registrations, diplomats from France, Belgium, and Ireland, as well as education experts from the government of Malta and UNRWA. To those of you, of course, also a warm welcome. The participants assembled here today may disagree on many issues regarding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but I'm confident that we can all agree that only a negotiated two-state solution holds the promise of solving this conflict peacefully. And I'm certain that we can all agree that in this context, the education of children towards peaceful coexistence is critical. It is in this spirit that we have organized today's discussion. And so I would like to first turn to Marcus. You're the CEO of Impact SE. It's an Israeli research, policy, and advocacy organization that monitors and analyzes education primarily in the Middle East. And importantly, you're using standards derived from UNESCO. Can you perhaps first give us a brief overview of some of the textbook developments in the wider region that you have analyzed?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Daniel. It would be a pleasure. Thank you, the Transatlantic Institute. And I, of course, would also like to recognize Nicholas, Michal, lawmakers from around Europe and beyond, and our own COO on this call, Arik Agassi. So can I first say that we all know textbooks are uniquely authoritative. They convey the political and social values that society wants to impart to the next generation. But this is particularly so in the Middle East, where outside of Israel, you tend to get one book for one subject for one grade. And so while textbooks can be a powerful barrier against acting out violence, for instance, we know that they can also be a blueprint for radicalization. And so since 1997, Impact SE has been examining MENA textbooks, as you say, Daniel, through UNESCO-derived standards of peace and tolerance, which are respect for the other, respect for the individual other, gender equality, no hate, peacemaking as the way to resolve conflict, economic prosperity, historical accuracy, and we also use a non-UNESCO standard of respect for the LGBTQ community. And, you know, Daniel, there is really good news. Our research shows there are serious improvements across MENA textbooks. For example, the UAE curriculum is remarkable. Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed reformed the curriculum, which was written originally by the Muslim Brotherhood in 2016. And we're reviewing it now, but we can see it teaches wasatiyah, tolerance, respect, peacemaking, truly an outstanding curriculum. In Jordan, King Abdullah II announced curriculum reform in 2014. It was, of course, after the Amman Letter, the Amman Conference of 2004 and 5, which proclaimed that change was needed in textbooks. And we see that while the Muslim Brotherhood demonstrated outside his palace, as these changes were made in opposition, he did it anyhow, and the changes are truly notable. Tunisia is the forerunner. For many years, textbooks there have educated about the importance of negotiations, peace, respect for the other, and how to talk about their own colonial past. And also in the Maghreb, Morocco, we know that King Mohammed VI has ordered the rewriting of textbooks, which we will review when that is completed. Egypt, I think it's fair to say President al-Sisi is taking a slow reform approach, but reform nonetheless. And I can give you one exclusive because we have pretty much finished reviewing the new Saudi Arabia textbooks for 2021, and we're highly encouraged. There is real significant effort being made, and we will be giving more information about that next week. Israeli textbooks promote peacemaking, with war being the worst possible option. They depict Palestinian history, narrative, national struggle. They mention the Nakba. They abhor racism and discrimination. I will say that the ultra-Orthodox textbooks do need modernizing, and we do take that up with the Israeli Ministry of Education. And I'll just finish by saying, unfortunately and unsurprisingly, not all is rosy. The Iranian textbooks are committed to a total struggle until the coming of the Mahdi, the Messiah. They talk about total hegemony in the region. Syrian textbooks are actually quite bizarre, written very recently, but they still take a radical Ba'athist approach, ignore the civil war, and there's a vision of a greater pan-Arab empire. And the Qatari textbooks, despite the amount of US influence in the writing of them, anti-Semitism is unfortunately central to the curriculum there, and we really do wish to see serious change in those Qatari books, Daniel.
Right, thank you. That's very interesting. Now let's drill down a little bit to the main topic. Your report about widespread incitement in textbooks issued by the Palestinian Authority has triggered the EU to commission an independent review and prompted the Norwegian government to withhold some of the funding to the PA until the textbooks have been cleaned up. Can you share with us some of your main findings?
Absolutely. And, firstly, I will say that the Palestinian textbooks were also totally revised in 2016, like the UAE, like the Jordanian textbooks. Unfortunately, they went in the other direction. They are actually the only example of textbooks in the region which are getting worse and not better. Peace is not presented as preferred or even possible. Peace agreements and proposals with Israel, which previously appeared in PA textbooks, have been totally removed so that there is very little left for young Palestinians to understand about what, for instance, Israel and Palestine living side by side could even look like. So the question is, what is in its place? And I'm going to make, hopefully not too desperate an effort to show you some slides here. We will just give me one moment and hopefully we will get there. I have been disabled from screen sharing by the host. Is there any way I can be enabled to screen share, please?
Can you try again, Marcus?
I will definitely do that. Okay, hopefully we are there. Can you see that, guys?
Yeah, that works.
Lovely. Okay, thank you for doing that so well and so quickly. So from year one, which is 6-year-olds clearly, we can see that violence is encouraged. In a reading exercise teaching the letter Ha, first grade, the words Shahid, martyr, Hujum, attack, and Harab are used as examples. Anti-Semitism suffuses this curriculum. It starts in grade 5, where young people are taught that there was constant Jewish attempts to kill the prophet. These classic anti-Jewish tropes run through Jews controlling finance, media, and politics. Here we are in grade 11 with a pretty well-known anti-Semitic motif of a hand holding a globe with the Star of David on it, an American flag as well. And in grade 12, young people are taught that Jews are liars and that they are fraudsters. Radicalization runs through science, which I think is indicative because it tells us just a little bit about what the Palestinian Authority is trying to do, what the strategy is, and to insert radicalization inside of science really takes quite some effort. So here we have an exercise for grade 4 students who were told to add up martyrs from the first intifada and the second intifada, and how many martyrs do you have? Not apples and not oranges. This goes to physics as well. Newton's second law being taught by the use of a slingshot. And it might be that you're not seeing this completely. Maybe that will be better. Salafi ideas, which actually we didn't see in the curriculum so much before 2016, now are very much a part of that. So this idea here that that death is better than living is in grade 5. So that is 11-year-olds being told that their lives are utterly worthless and they should be they should be martyrs. They frankly should be sacrificed. Terrorism is considered to be legitimate here, a natural right. This is actually an example which is used of nearly 2 decades before the State of Israel was even established. The murder of 69 Jews inside of Hebron, which is considered in the Palestinian curriculum to be entirely legitimate, as is the Munich Olympic massacre. That was striking at Zionist targets abroad. And Dalal Mughrabi appears in this curriculum several times. She was a participant in the murder of 36 innocent people, including quite a few children. And she is taught as a role model, specifically for young women, which is quite terrifying, and something which the Palestinian Authority have been told about over and over again. But there was an insistence to keep that in. Israel doesn't exist on maps. So, when I was talking about the idea of, Israel and Palestine living side by side, there was no indication of it here, no sense whatsoever that young people can have of the possibility of this. Instead, if you like, 48 Israeli, that is to say, Israeli towns and cities between 48 and 67 are considered to be Palestinian according to this curriculum. And really, from the Mediterranean Sea to the west, to the Jordan River in the east, that is Palestine, from the river to the sea. And I think I'll just show you this one because, this is particularly frightening to me. This is, young people in the morning reciting this particular poem. They are saying that they will sacrifice their blood, eliminate the usurper, and annihilate the remnants of the foreigners. This is 9-year-olds. And so, a curriculum which is, really quite remarkably radical. And, this has not been lost on anybody. Clearly the European Parliament, as people here will know, has been, very much, involved in trying to change this. There was legislation passed in 2018, in 2020. The United Nations Third Committee condemned this curriculum. So, it has not been lost on people that this curriculum is terrible and that it needs changing. But, and here is, I think, the real takeaway, change has not come. September 2020, a brand new Palestinian curriculum came online and there were no substantive changes to it. The hate is still there, the anti-Semitism, the calls to jihad and to surrender.
Well, thank you, Marcus, for now. I want to turn now to our other panelists. Just a brief announcement. Of course, as soon as we are done with our panelists on our first round, there will, of course, be an opportunity for all of you to ask questions or make statements. If you want to do so, please just write in the chat group, make that announcement, or write to tai@ajc.org. Let me turn to Nicholas. You're the vice chair of the European Parliament's Budget Committee. Now, the EU, as we all know, is the PA's most important donor. It doesn't really pay for these textbooks directly, but first of all, money is, of course, fungible. And second, the EU helps to pay the salaries of the teachers who are using this material. So what actions have you and the Parliament taken to help improve Palestinian textbooks?
Good afternoon, Daniel and all my fellow lawmakers. Well, let me just start by saying, or answering this question by saying what we did not achieve. We tried again a couple of times. I did this just a few weeks ago to put a certain amount of money into reserve to hold it back until the issue is solved. That was not successful due to the way we work here, and we always need to make compromises. But what we did achieve is we had just a successfully tabled amendment concerning the discharge, the latest discharge of the year 2018. So we're not talking about the annual budget, but of the discharge, which is also a budget-wise a important tool. And what we did, and I'm not talking about the committee, I'm talking about the plenary. So 60% of the MEPs were in favor of this amendment, and we expressed our concern about that the problematic material is still not in these textbooks are still not removed, and we were concerned about the quote continued failure to act effectively against this hate speech and violence. And just as you said, money is fungible, and we are responsible, and we insisted that the salaries of teachers and education sector civil servants that are financed from union funds, such as PEGAS, should be used for drafting and teaching curricula which reflect UNESCO standards, peace, tolerance, coexistence. And I think this is something that the Commission has to take into account, and we will continue to draft such amendments until the issue is solved in a proper way.
Well, thank you, first of all, for your efforts. But in your analysis, what are the political obstacles that make it so far so difficult to take more decisive action? I know there is, of course, often a divide between so-called pro-Israeli and pro-Palestinian lawmakers, and they may disagree on, who is responsible for why there isn't yet peace. And but when it comes to this issue, I would imagine that it shouldn't be a zero-sum game. Stopping the indoctrination of children should be something we can all agree on. In your analysis, what's the problem here then?
You're absolutely right. This shouldn't be a matter of left or right or pro-Israeli or pro-Palestinian. This is there's a big misunderstanding among all party groups, but especially among the left side of the parliament. You're doing no good to Palestinian pupils in school if you don't tackle the problem. And there's a big misunderstanding for those who want to help the Palestinian cause in general. And there's a wrong understanding of being a third party, I guess. And we really have to make clear that the best thing that you can do for Palestinian youth is to tackle the problem. So I think what Impact is doing is not only pro-Israeli, which is of course the case, but it's also the best thing you can do for the Palestinian youth. So we have to take up we have to make consequences here, and it's not about the general conflict. It's a very unique problem, and just like Markus said, it's every dictator, every extremist tries to go after the youth, try to plant the seed of hate into the heads of young people, and we have to stop them from being successful.
Right. Now, you are also interacting, I assume, with the European Commission, with the European External Action Service. Now, the Norwegian government has taken more or less immediate action following the impact report. Why did the EAS and Commission contrast, waste time and money to commission another? In my mind, it would have been far cheaper and faster to simply maybe independently check the examples provided by Impact, and if they turn out to be correct, then I think that should have been evidence enough to at least put a hold on this to effect real change.
Well, unfortunately, I really can't answer this question because the Commission is acting quite intransparent, and that's the main political problem from my point of view, and this really bothers me because what we really need to have around here is trust on both sides. We need to solve the problem with trust, and the way the Commission is acting here, and I think we will talk about the report and the study by the Georg Eckert Institute later on. What they are doing here is undermining the trust on both sides, and I won't overestimate my own role here, but at least I'm a European lawmaker, member of the European Parliament. I wrote to the Commission a couple of times, together with colleagues, alone, and I never got an answer at all. So I wrote to Josep Borrell and try to, solve this issue a little bit and try to, bring a little bit of transparency to it. At least I should have gotten a short answer, I guess. So they are acting like they would cover up something. That's absolutely unnecessary. Why did we do such a study again? Well, you could argue about that, but if you do such a study, it needs to be a common basis. You need to have trust in it. And if there are mistakes being made, okay, then let's talk about the mistakes. And it's absolutely a normal thing to have a review, a peer review, just before it is published. I mean, that's the way we do it around here, if we finance it publicly. And this is missing. So unfortunately, the Commission is working without the necessary transparency, and we need to talk about that.
Thank you, Niklas. Michal, last but certainly not least, thank you so much for joining us. You're a member of the Knesset for Blue and White, a member of a number of relevant committees for this topic, including the Delegation for Relations with the European Parliament. We just heard what the Palestinian Authority teaches its children. It really doesn't take an education expert to imagine what the possible impact may be on these children. Now, my question to you, as an Israeli politician and as an Israeli citizen, how does this impact Israeli society and the prospects for peace when Israelis read about these and other examples of Palestinian incitement?
So I'd like to actually respond to that question and begin with where you began, and that is the assumption that we all agree that we long for peace, that we long for solution. And the question really that beckons to be asked is how that can happen, right? How peace, sustainable peace, long-lasting peace between peoples can be achieved. And I would like to begin with the children. And actually, I would like to begin with a quote from Nelson Mandela, that the prospects for peace are much greater when children are taught acceptance for one another. And from there, I'd like to segue into your question and say the following. It's not just about Israeli children, and this is not Israel's issue. I would like to argue that this is very much the responsibility of all trustees of international law and human rights, of all those that care or presumably care about the well-being of all children and human rights and the rights of all children throughout the world. And I'll tell you that this morning, the Knesset held a committee hearing about the well-being, the emotional well-being of Palestinian children, except that what I would like to say is the stripping of agency of their parents, of their leadership, of their teachers, of their textbooks, of what they are being taught is actually the perpetuation of this continued inability to pass through this impasse, a continued empowerment of what I would call the culture of impunity, of the leadership that is holding those children hostage. And so all those claiming to be, whether claiming to be or in fact being trustees of human rights in any way, and I include all international organizations, all countries with shared values that speak to human rights and children's rights, actually have the role, the responsibility to hold to account any double standard, any singling out, anything that passes below the radar or above the radar, because what happens in textbooks, as we've heard, is not below the radar at all. It's right there, black on white. And we know that turning this generation of children is actually abusing their rights, not the rights of Israeli children. And I would like to argue that we have to bring, as parliamentarians, this argument into the equation. I would like to argue that this really isn't about Israel. Of course, Israeli children's rights are undermined when they are not, or when a double standard is placed in such a way that their well-being is not taken care of. That the understanding that they are the targets of whether it's calls for genocide or pure anti-Semitism. And we know that most of the countries we're speaking to have adopted the IRA working definition of anti-Semitism, including the 3 Ds, including the demonization, delegitimization and double standard of the state of Israel, old and new anti-Semitism converge in 2020 in textbooks. And European countries that have adopted the IRA working definition are actually violating their own adoption of that IRA working definition. And so I argue that as parliamentarians, we have an extremely important role in first of all, exposing those double standards and the delegitimization of this kind. And secondly, in addressing those double standards, because when you undermine the principles of international law, of human rights in this way, you cannot protect the rights of any child, anywhere. You cannot protect the rights of any country. And in that sense, I think that we have a very compelling case to make, including with my European counterparts, including in an international bipartisan task force that we've created, that we've launched after several hearings regarding online anti-Semitism, actually that took place in the Israeli Knesset, together with parliamentarians in the United States, in Canada, in the UK, in Australia. And really the tackling of this through the understanding that it isn't just about the Israeli children's rights. It isn't just about Israel. It isn't just about anti-Semitism, by the way, because if you can't tackle anti-Semitism, and we have a definition, an agreed definition of anti-Semitism, you cannot tackle any hate speech. And that is our joint commitment that I think that we need to be addressing. Sorry if I've gone on for too long.
No, that's fine. You mentioned the IRA working definition. Perhaps not everybody on this call may be familiar with it. Could you briefly explain what this is and why it is particularly also relevant for this Palestinian textbook discussion?
So I'll say, so first of all, so the International Remembrance, Holocaust Remembrance, excuse me, I forget the last A, Alliance, thank you. Alliance actually worked on for several years a very, very clear definition in its entirety. And by the way, when you look up the IRA working definition, there is a short definition in a neat little box. But most of these, if not all of these countries, and actually I think the Premier League in the UK, including many, many additional, the police force in France, has adopted the IRA working definition. I think we should all become familiar with it, because in that sense, there is actually a very important understanding. And actually, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the important understanding that we see even in the Abraham Accords. The Abraham Accords, which, and I really truly regard this as potentially a historic moment in time, include what I call a pivot away from the 1967 Khartoum 3 no's, no to recognition, no to negotiation, and no to peace with Israel, to what I would say are the 3 yeses. Yes to recognition, yes to negotiation, yes to peace, and I would argue in that order. You cannot negotiate if you don't recognize the other's right to exist. In Israel's case, as a Jewish and democratic state that it was founded to be. And if you do not negotiate, you cannot reach peace. And so when we began our conversation with that presumption of 2 states living side by side in peaceful coexistence, well, we have a historic moment to identify what it takes for that peace to actually be created. And as I said, recognition, enabling negotiation, ultimately paving the path towards sustainable, long-lasting peace. And you know, what's really noteworthy is that Bahrain, not officially, but actually a significant organization in Bahrain, adopted the IRA working definition on anti-Semitism. So that just cements the fact that recognition includes the other's right to exist, right? It seems so basic. And I'll say more than that. In the UAE textbooks, they began teaching in 2016, if we want to learn from, this historic paradigm shift, the UAE textbooks began talking about tolerance and coexistence to their children in 2016. In 2020, if we look right now at textbooks being taught to children in the UAE, the Abraham Accords are there. The Abraham Accords, as their name attests to, declaring the shared values that bind us together. And one more thing that the Abraham Accords has exposed that we shouldn't miss is who opposes the Abraham Accords. And I turn to my fellow parliamentarians in the EU as well and say, aligning with Iran or aligning with Hezbollah and aligning with Hamas that do not accept the Abrahamic Accords as a path to peace exposes at the very least, potential double standards and possibly just ignorance. And we have to address that from that direction as well, because it all intersects. In that sense, it really is a historic time that we live in, but it all intersects and demands great responsibility and great accountability and holding to account. And funding, finances are really key. So European funding that's going to, and of course we said it's fungible and so on, but European funding that we know is going to textbooks that teach hate is an unacceptable, it's an unacceptable reality in a situation where the trustees of human rights, the trustees of rights of these children can sort of, with a blink of an eye, fund books that promote anti-Semitism, fund books that enable terror, ultimately.
Thank you very much, Michal. At this stage, I want to check whether any of our participants want to maybe make a statement or ask a question. If anybody wants to raise his or her hand. If not,
yes,
then...
Daniel.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Please.
Thank you very much for organizing this webinar. And well, what we hear here today, I think that's indeed really shocking to realize that we are working for many, many years on the issue of anti-Semitism in Palestinian school books, and we don't see progress. What we see is that the situation is becoming worse and worse. So the point is, it's good to see that from the side of the European Parliament, well, we are working on it, and we put some money in the reserve and so on. But it's clear what we did, it's not enough. And I think we have to see, and maybe we can use also this platform. We have to see what can we do more. What's our next step we have to take? Putting again money in the reserve. Do we have to reduce the budget? Do we have to write again a letter to Mr. Borrell? I think I have the impression we are still waiting for his answer, because some weeks ago we sent a letter to him. So that's also a question to my colleague from the European Parliament. I'm really willing to work together and to see what we can do. And I'm really willing especially to work together with a colleague in the Budget Control Committee, because I think that's a really important committee in that respect. But that's the main issue. What can we do more? I think we have to do more. So our message is not clear enough, I'm afraid.
Nicholas, you wanna say something?
Well, first of all, we all know how politics work, and that sometimes walking down the road takes a lot of time. We should not give up. That's the main message. And the second one, we have to align across party lines. Too often, this is viewed as a political matter of political color. It's not. It's and we have our problems in all our party groups. And there are still some colleagues that we can that we should convince, and that we are able to convince them. So the main answer is we shouldn't give up. We should continue to work on it. By the way, it's not a few weeks that I wrote this letter to Mr. Borrell. It's a few months. So I guess it doesn't want to answer. And we have to keep the Commission responsible, and we have to ask them, and we have to stay on track. That's the main answer. And again, what we may have to make sure is that we align across party lines, and that's my kind of answer. And I hope in a few years we will look back and say the struggle was worth it, and we were successful.
If I may add something here, I think first of all of your colleagues from national parliaments obviously have a role to play. This is not just strictly an EU institution issue. I'm sure many member state governments provide their funding. And in the end, of course, the EU is made out of member states. So if you have any possibilities to also speak directly with colleagues in your own, from your own party in your national parliaments, with foreign ministers, from your party or prime ministers. I think we need to tackle this from all sides. I think Agnes raised her hand. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Daniel. Hello, everybody. I'm a Hungarian member of parliament, so I'm not surprised at anything at all. What I can tell you is I think expert documents are very, very important, but I don't think that's enough, and that we have to go a step ahead and put kind of political pressure on European politicians. And it's not a question of Palestinian-Israeli debate. It's the question that the very basic founding values of the European Union is solidarity, cooperation, and coexistence. So I think maybe we should try to find other networks where, together with national members of parliaments in the European Union, we can work together what to do, of course, together with our colleagues from the European Parliament, to make it clear to our politicians, either in the Commission or in the European Council, that there is a political will to stop this kind of practice. I mean, European taxpayers' money cannot fund hate, dot. And so for that, I think we should join, regardless of our political views, and work together. What kind of a common solution we can find to change the situation for the good of all students, all pupils in the region. So I very much agree with her colleague from Israel. She was really right that of course, this is a problem for Israel, but this is a problem for the children of Palestine as well, because they are going to grow up in an atmosphere which is completely against the world and because completely against the European thinking. So maybe, colleagues, if we can join forces, the European Parliament with national parliaments, I'm offering our political groups help in this to find a solution to this, put political pressure and make it sure that Europe is not going to finance any hate. Thank you.
I'm sorry. Sorry.
Oh, you go ahead. Sorry.
Really briefly, I just wanted to interject and just to piggyback off of what you just said, just remind us that the incitement violates Article 29 of the Convention of the Rights of the Child, in which, according to Article 29 of the UNCRC, a child or young person's education should help their mind, body, and talents be the best they can. It should also build their respect for other people and the world around them. In particular, they should learn to respect their rights and the rights of others, signed by all European states. And so I really am, I fumble whenever we speak of this as Israel's issue. It really is an issue. And if we talk about it, and I'll say this also as a former fellow, in the Institute for Counterterrorism, if we talk about the world's struggle against counterterrorism and we don't look at education, then we are not holding to account those very textbooks, those very parents, those very schools, those very teachers that ultimately, we're dealing with years down the line and trying to treat the symptom rather than the problem. I'm sorry I interrupted.
No. You are here to speak. I'm just here to moderate, but I just wanted to also add to what Agnes said. I like very much the idea. And obviously, the Transatlantic Friends of Israel is just that sort of network that can be used for this exact purpose. So please, anybody on this call, other colleagues, you can rally for this cause. We are here to provide sort of the back office and do the organizational work. And this webinar is obviously part of our efforts to tackle this problem. If I may, at the moment, I don't see other questions or comments from our participants. I hope I'm not overlooking people. If at the moment there are no questions, maybe if I can ask you, Marcus, one follow-up question. So in reaction to your report, impacts report on Palestinian textbooks, the European Commission commissioned, or it was still Mogherini at the time, an independent report by a German think tank. Now, again, I don't really know why we need another report. As I said earlier, I think it would have been far cheaper and faster to simply, you know, look at the examples you provided and get an independent translator to confirm it. And if it's indeed the case, then that should have been more than enough to intervene. But okay, they have asked for another quite expensive analysis. It's already a year going on, and you've been able to get hold of sort of an interim report, and it raises more questions than it answers. Can you talk a little bit about what you've learned about this?
Indeed. And you know, one wants to be generous and say that, you know, in the research business, anything which adds to our sum of is always a good thing. Unfortunately, this did not. You know, ultimately, it is terribly flawed. It started off with an inception report, which was full of, you know, quite basic and embarrassing Arabic mistakes, and which quoted research which actually does not exist. But I think it was the interim report which was most problematic. First of all, for reasons which is beyond me, the Commission kept it secret. The idea of keeping, you know, academic research secret rather than opening it up to peer review is frankly an anathema and goes against all, you know, all practice in relation to research. It was available on the internet, so there was no leak. And, you know, takeaways, they used the wrong books. Firstly, they used Israeli textbooks, presented them as Palestinian textbooks, and then praised the Palestinian Ministry of Education for making improvements and for talking about cooperation with Israel.
Let me interject. So these were Israeli textbooks, but they are in Hebrew, right?
Well, no, they're in Arabic. You know, Israel has many curricula because, you know, Israel is a very heterogeneous society, and so you know, children are taught in Hebrew. They're taught in Arabic, and then within that, you know, within Hebrew, you know, clearly there are several different curricula, and within Arabic as well. So this is a curricula specifically for Jerusalem schools, as it happens. But you know, anyone who knows, and that is anybody who, you know, truly is invested in what is going on in the region in relation to curricula, you know, knows that these are textbooks taught in Israel's Jerusalem schools. And so, you know, this was kind of appalling and embarrassing. But I think more insidious, more frightening, was that the review completely ignored the anti-Semitism, which, you know, I tried to show you in that presentation. It's terror resistance. Dalal Mughrabi, both in the Palestinian curriculum and also in this review, was considered a role model to young girls. So not only was the review methodologically, you know, flawed is not the word, you know, a complete and absolute mess of a methodology, but, you know, ignoring all the issues which so need to be brought to light, the hate, the anti-Semitism, the jihad, and actually supporting the idea that terror is, you know, is considered to be a resistance, you know, was extraordinarily problematic. So, you know, what does one do then? And I think this is, you know, this is the question. Having brought to light the problems in the report, one would have imagined that, you know, the EU would have, you know, simply said, well, clearly we have a problem. We need to be transparent about this. We need a full discussion. We need a peer review. You know, the point about an interim review is to see how we're doing. The answer is, you know, really, you did particularly badly. So let's stop now. Let us have a review of this interim review and then go on to the full review. Unfortunately, the result was entirely the opposite. The result was a lack of transparency, a inability to express what actually went wrong here, and, you know, a repetition of the same statement. We are going on to the full review and we will show you that when it is finished. Well, if the full review is based on the interim report, I think, you know, Houston, we have a real problem.
Wow, that's really shocking. Have you, Nicholas? You said you've written several times to the Commission and didn't get any response. Have you gotten any response, Marcus, or journalists? on this issue?
Well, you know, journalists have got have got several different responses, which in and of itself, you know, expresses how problematic this is. You know, one German journalist elicited from the Reviewing Institute the reality that the wrong books were used. But even after that, the spokesperson of the EU insisted that this was not actually the case, even when the reviewers had admitted it. You know, EU spokespeople have, you know, essentially corrected themselves, gone back on themselves. You know, it seems quite frankly like far too much effort is being put into how to paper over the cracks here, and no effort at all in actually getting a decent review of the Palestinian curriculum. You know, we do this every year. We review the Palestinian curriculum every year. We review the Israeli curriculum as soon as there is a new review to do, and all other curricula in the region. And so, you know, we know how to do this. And, you know, we are entirely open to peer review, entirely open to other people doing their own reviews. What, you know, is entirely a waste of time is a review which, you know, frankly, and I use this word very carefully, but a whitewash. And this review is a whitewash.
Wow. Nicholas?
Maybe just, let me just seize the opportunity and stress that this is a serious issue, that the Commission used a different explanation for this failure than the Goethe Institute itself, at least publicly in the press. And this, you know, leads to the impression that there's something that needs to be covered up. And this is totally, when we're talking about European taxpayers' money in the end, this is totally unacceptable. I mean, mistakes happen.
Nobody registered. Is that correct, Michael, Jonas, right? Which in and of itself is also unfortunate. Now, if, and the possibility that they may come out with what looks like a really flawed report. What are our options? What can we do? And again, and maybe I want to talk hear from Nicholas particularly, and maybe other members of the European Parliament specifically who are on this call. I mean, can they simply ignore your? I mean, I'm still a little bit shocked that they wouldn't even answer you to a question. You are an elected official.
Well, they won't ignore me for long, I hope. And maybe it's just a test how stubborn I am. So, but
you're from northern Germany, so
I'm from northern Germany. I
definitely underestimate you.
And I have a couple of years left at least, so I will finally get an answer somehow. Now, the real thing is, if this study has to or should make any sense, it has to be accepted as a common basis. And due to the acting, especially of the Commission, it won't be a common basis. It won't be accepted. So therefore, it's useless. And €250,000 has been wasted. That's it.
And more time.
And that is, by the way, sorry to interrupt you. That is, by the way, why we, across party lines, a couple of members of the European Parliament wrote a letter and expressed this. And this is a situation. If you asked the question, does it make sense to have another study? Well, if it should make sense, well, it has to be accepted, and it won't be accepted due to the failure. And so, as I said, wasted money.
Right.
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
Yes, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for this invitation. I'm first time in politics, and I'm really shocked. I'm in opposite of colleague Agnes Vadai from Hungary. I'm shocked what I hear from your presentation, Marcus Chef. We need to set this to our government. We need to push European Union, and we need to call it's a violence against children. Such kind of textbooks and this is not just against children of Israel, it's world around, but I hear today it's impossible for me. I'm shocked. I lost speech before. I many times switch off my system. It's overloaded today, work all time. I'm not sure that I will continue, but I think we need something to do. I will do in my parliament in Latvia. I will try to push. We can speak through embassies and ask how they can explain like this, because it's really seriously. It's a crime against humanity, and at first a crime against children to raise up with hate. Thank you. I'm shocked. I cannot speak anymore. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your words, and thank you for Michal. Yeah, please.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say that, you know, just following up on the last speaker, just to say that I think we have many formal and informal opportunities to engage our fellow parliamentarians. And sometimes, you know, sort of we're in our echo chambers and we are familiar with the facts, but there are many that may not be. I'm not claiming that everybody that is, is willing to do something about it. But the question that I would really like to pose, you know, in this forum, and of course, as we continue, and I'm always available to engage, is how we engage all parliamentarians in this way so that they are familiar. So I know the reports, you know, are available and readily, you know, sort of, but that's assuming that somebody is willing to engage with a report and read the entire report and understand the ramifications of the report. And we have many, many opportunities, as I said, formal and informal. So in Israel's parliament, we have friendship groups that we have, you know, I'm the chair of the Canada-Israel friendship group, but we have many friendship groups with each of the countries. Then we have the more formal alliances that we have, whether the IPU, the OSCE, the European Parliament. And so actually in the forums that I've participated, when I raise these issues, whether it's, you know, and again, from my, previous experience that I bring into Parliament with me, whether it's the engagement with the imperative to reform the ICC. As trustees of human rights, Israel is not a member state, but the funding member states, be it Germany, be it Japan, they have the responsibility to ensure that the ICC upholds its mission, vision, and values. And when it doesn't, then they fail to, you know, ensure that the ICC fulfills its role. In the same way, I think that, you know, the violation of children's rights in this way, and the enablement of double standards, which ultimately empowers a continued culture of impunity, is really a responsibility of parliamentarians around the globe. And as I said before, the Interparliamentary Task Force, international and bipartisan, has been very successful at addressing a very specific issue. In that case, online anti-Semitism. I'm basically proposing a possibility of engaging parliamentarians on this very specific issue, and making this, you know, a case and cause through which we expose and identify, you know, other double standards, but in this case, that really affect children very, very dramatically.
Very good. I think we have time for one last comment. Umberto, where are you? Yeah, Umberto, who is the advisor to TFI Vice Chair Carmen Avram. Please go ahead.
Yes, hello everybody. I hope you can hear me well. Thank you for the presentations. I just wanted to give you an update because Carmen Avram, so a socialist member of European Parliament from Romania, she did sign the joint letters with other colleagues from the Parliament here in Brussels. She also tabled a parliamentary question to which the Commission and the services, and it's going to go back from External Action Service to other DGs, Director Generals. There is a question precisely on this issue of the textbooks, which is the deadline is next week, 15th of December. So I just wanted to inform you that as soon as we get an answer, maybe for a Christmas present, we'll keep you posted. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much, Umberto. We are coming to the end of our webinar. Let me just sort of, because so many of you have said that this is really an issue that we should definitely work on together. And I'm really excited that this it's a sad topic in many ways, but I'm excited about the energy that I'm feeling here from some of you. we would definitely like to share this to with a larger audience on social media, but also we will share this recording with your colleagues in Parliament across Europe, in the United States, in North America, who were not able to participate. And then we will discuss among ourselves whether we will maybe wait until we get this final report, and then perhaps together play out a scenario of how we can, as a group together, members of national parliaments, members of the European parliaments together, address this issue in a coherent way, maybe sign a draft and sign a joint declaration, so that puts a little bit pressure on the Commission here in Brussels, but also on governments, and for most, perhaps even more important, share this information, because unfortunately I'm afraid most people will not even be familiar with this situation. And again, this is not really something that should divide us, irrespective of where some people may come out on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This is really ought to be very, very non-political, and which makes it even more shocking that it's so difficult to get to a network to work on this together. And we will, before the end of the year, get back to you on what we want, what we plan to do, and I hope we can count on all of your support to rally your colleagues and others to make really a difference. And with that, I really thank you all for joining us today, and for your interest and for your continued support, and particularly our panelists for their contribution. And I'm looking forward to seeing many of you again for our next webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.